The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was the day Mom had her worst treatments, the ones that left her too tired to even lift her hand to wave at me when I walked into the room. I had walked into the hospital that afternoon carrying a paper bag with a grilled cheese sandwich from the diner on 5th, the one she always liked, the one with the thick sourdough bread she used to make herself when things were better. She couldn't eat it. She was asleep before I even set it down on the little rolling table beside her bed. I sat there for maybe an hour just watching her breathe, counting the seconds between each rise and fall of her chest like somehow that would keep her here longer, like attention was a kind of medicine. And when I finally stood up to leave, I noticed a small envelope tucked under the edge of her water cup. I thought it was a note from the nurses, maybe a billing update or one of those soft pamphlets about grief counseling they kept leaving behind, but my name was on it, just my first name in handwriting I didn't recognize, neat, careful, like someone who took their time with everything. I opened it standing right there beside her bed, and when I pulled out what was inside, my knees actually went soft on me, not from grief, from confusion so deep it felt like vertigo, because it was a receipt, a hospital payment receipt for 2 full months of my mother's treatment, paid in full, and at the very bottom in that same careful handwriting just 4 words. Keep showing up for her. No name, no explanation, just those words. And a feeling I still haven't been able to shake, the feeling that I had been wrong about something or someone for a very long time. To understand why that letter broke something open in me, you have to understand where I came from. You have to understand the kind of house I grew up in, the kind of neighborhood that shapes a person before they even know they're being shaped. We lived in a part of town called Millfield. That's not its real name, but the real name doesn't matter. You've seen neighborhoods like it. You've driven through them maybe on the way to somewhere else. Old houses with paint starting to peel at the corners, chain link fences with morning glory growing through them like nature was trying to make something pretty out of something tired. Yards that were small but kept. People who were proud even when they didn't have much to be proud of materially. My mother's name was Diane. She worked the morning shift at a laundromat called Sunshine Clean for 14 years. 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when they were short-staffed. She smelled like detergent and fabric softener when she came home. When I was young, I used to think that smell was what warmth itself smelled like. I still can't walk past a laundromat without something in my chest going quiet and full at the same time. My father, his name was Carl. He was there for the first part of my life, and then, for reasons that took me years to understand and more years to accept, he wasn't. He didn't leave dramatically. There was no big fight, no slamming door, no scene. He just became someone who visited sometimes, and then someone who called sometimes, and then someone who existed in a drawer of old photographs. He had a stillness to him that I used to admire as a boy, the way he could sit on the front steps in the evening and not need to say anything. Later, I understood that stillness differently. Some people are quiet because they're at peace, and some people are quiet because they've given up explaining themselves even to themselves. Carl remarried when I was 15. Her name was Patricia. She had a house on Wexford Road, the nice part of town, with an actual 2-car garage and a mailbox shaped like a barn. I went to dinner there twice, sat at a table with cloth napkins and a salad fork I wasn't sure what to do with. Patricia was polite to me in the careful way people are polite to things that make them slightly uncomfortable. I ate my food and looked at the painting above the fireplace, a seascape, sailboats, a horizon that looked like possibility, and I remember thinking, this is what my father chose instead. And then I remember thinking, okay, I understand you now, Carl. I think I finally understand. I never said that out loud, but after that second dinner, I stopped going. By the time I was a junior in high school, Mom and I had it down to science. 2 people, 1 income, 1 house, 1 car that coughed in the cold. We made it work the way working class people always make it work, by being precise with money, by not wasting anything, by finding small joys that didn't cost much and holding onto them tight. Friday nights we watched whatever old movie was on cable and shared a bowl of popcorn with that slightly too much butter she always put on it. Sunday mornings she made biscuits, not the ones from a tube reel, ones from a recipe her own mother had taught her, measured out by feeling rather than by spoon. She'd hum while she made them, an old song, something country, something I could never quite place the name of but could always recognize. That kitchen on Sunday mornings is a place I still visit in my head when the world gets loud. School was where things got complicated. His name was Mr. Gerald Holt. He taught 11th grade English, and it turned out had strong opinions about who was worth his attention and who wasn't. Mr. Holt was the kind of teacher who wore the same 4 shirts on rotation, who had a mug on his desk that said world's okayest teacher, which we all assumed was ironic, because he carried himself like someone who considered themselves considerably above average. He had a beard that was always just slightly too long to look intentional and just slightly too short to look casual, and he had a way of looking at you over his glasses that made you feel like he had already graded you as a person and found you lacking. He was also brilliant, I'll give him that even now. When he talked about books, really talked, not lectured, but talked, you could feel the room change. He had this way of pulling the sadness out of a story and holding it up to the light like a piece of sea glass so you could see what color it actually was. I wanted to learn from him. I walked into that class in September of junior year wanting genuinely to learn. But something about me seemed to get under his skin from the very first week. I was never late, I never caused trouble. I did the reading, but my papers came back with grades that felt wrong, not just harsh, but wrong. C- on essays I had rewritten 3 times. A D on an analysis paper that my friend Marcus, who copied half his ideas from mine, got a B+ on. I remember staring at that paper, staring at that D, and feeling something I can only describe as a quiet rage, the kind that doesn't explode, it just sits in your stomach and burns low and steady for months. I went to him after class once, just once. I asked, as calmly as a 16-year-old who feels cheated can ask, if he could explain the grade. He looked at me over those glasses, set down his pen, and said, some students understand literature and some students understand the words on the page. There's a difference, and right now you're in the 2nd category. Then he turned back to his papers. I stood there for another few seconds, not sure what I was waiting for. An apology maybe. An explanation that made sense, anything. Then I picked up my backpack and walked out. I didn't stop working hard, but I stopped believing the grades meant anything about me. Mom was diagnosed in the spring of my senior year. clear. Ovarian cancer, stage 2 moving toward 3. The doctor who told us had kind eyes and a very flat voice, like someone who had delivered this particular kind of sentence so many times that the kindness had all migrated into his face and left his words behind. I remember the drive home from that appointment. Mom in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, looking out the window at nothing in particular. The radio was on low, some afternoon talk show, people laughing about something. I reached over and turned it off. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just drove through Millfield with its chain-link fences and its morning glory and its pride. And when we pulled into our driveway, she sat for a moment before she opened the door. "We're going to handle this," she said, not dramatically. The way she said everything important quietly like a fact. I nodded. "We're going to handle it," I agreed. And then I got out of the car and went inside and sat on the edge of my bed in the room I'd had since I was 7, with the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from when I was little, and I let myself fall apart privately for about 20 minutes. Crying, the kind of crying that isn't sad exactly, it's scared. The kind where you're not grieving what's lost yet, you're grieving what might be. Then I washed my face, went back downstairs, and started making dinner. That was how we were. That was what Diane had taught me without ever making it a lesson. You fall apart and then you make dinner. You feel the thing and then you do the next thing, not because the feeling is small, but because the next thing is also real and someone has to do it. Treatment wasn't cheap. That's the part people who haven't been through it don't fully understand. Even with insurance, and ours was the kind that covered just enough to make you feel like you weren't completely alone while still leaving you to figure out a staggering amount on your own, the costs added up in ways that could hollow a person out. Copays, medications not covered. The little things nobody warns you about, like parking at the hospital, $5 every visit, which doesn't sound like much until you're going 3 times a week and you're trying to hold a household together on what's left of a laundromat salary because mom couldn't work the full schedule anymore. I picked up hours at the gas station on Clement Avenue. Late shifts mostly, 3 nights a week after school and all day Saturday. The guy who owned it, Mr. Patel, was a small quiet man who never said much but always left me a coffee in a paper cup when I came in for the late shift. It was one of those small kindnesses that you don't forget. The coffee was always too sweet, but I drank every drop. I graduated that May, walked across a gym stage in a borrowed robe and accepted my diploma from a principal I'd barely spoken to, and scanned the bleachers until I found mom thinner than she used to be, her hair different now, but there, sitting straight, smiling like nothing in the world could keep her from being in that gym on that day. My father wasn't there. I'd sent him an announcement out of some leftover obligation I hadn't quite finished with yet. He sent a card with a $20 bill inside. I kept the 20 and tried not to feel anything about the card. I didn't go to college that fall. I couldn't. Not with mom the way she was, not with the bills the way they were. I told myself it was temporary and I mostly believed it. Community college maybe later when things stabilized. But for now I needed to be here, driving her to appointments, being the person who handed her the water cup and turned off the too loud television and sat beside her when the nights got long and the silence got heavy and she needed another breathing human being in the room. I was 20 years old and I felt ancient in the best possible way. The way that good weight makes you feel the weight of mattering to someone. It was my mother's nurse, a woman named Renata with short silver hair and the walk of someone who had seen everything and remained gentle anyway, who first mentioned that the billing had changed. "Your mother's account," she said one afternoon, catching me in the hallway with a clipboard in her hands and a careful look on her face. "Someone has been making payments, consistent payments for several months now. I wanted to make sure you knew because sometimes there are arrangements made through family members and the communication gets mixed up." I stared at her. "Family members or other parties," she said carefully. "It happens more than you'd think, people who want to help anonymously." I asked her if she knew who. She said she didn't, or if she did she was protecting something she'd been asked to protect. She had that quality, the kind of discretion that looks like kindness because it probably is. I went home that night and went through every person I could think of. Mom's sister in Ohio possible, but she had her own struggles. A couple of mom's friends from the laundromat, sweet women loyal, but none of them had this kind of money. The church we'd attended occasionally possible, but they would have said something the way churches do. I kept turning it over, coming up empty. And then I almost stopped thinking about it, because the thing about being in survival mode is that you don't have a lot of spare mental energy for mysteries. You use what you have for what's in front of you. That's when the letter appeared. The Tuesday letter, the one under the water cup, the one with those 4 words at the bottom of a receipt that I unfolded in a hospital room while my mother slept and the machines breathed their steady rhythm beside her. "Keep showing up for her." 4 words, and I knew that handwriting. I couldn't place it immediately, but I knew it. The way you know a smell before you can name it. Careful, deliberate. Every letter placed like it meant something to the person writing it. I drove home. I went to my old backpack, the one from senior year that I still hadn't fully cleaned out, sitting in the back of the closet. I pulled out every paper Mr. Holt had ever returned to me, every marked up essay, every graded assignment with that red pen bleeding all over my words. I laid them out on the kitchen table and I looked at the comments, the handwriting on the papers, and I laid the letter beside them. The same curve on the lowercase g, the same deliberate cross on the T, the same steady, careful pressure of someone who believed that how you wrote said something about how you thought. Gerald Holt, my English teacher, the man who had given me D's on essays I'd worked myself half to death on, the man who told me to my face that I understood words but not literature. That teacher had been paying my dying mother's hospital bills. For 2 years, I sat down slowly in one of the kitchen chairs and I looked at the ceiling for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the block. The world kept going, completely indifferent to the fact that everything I thought I understood had just quietly rearranged itself. And I know what you're thinking. I know because I thought it too in the hours after I sat at that kitchen table. Maybe there's a simple explanation. Maybe he knew my mother somehow from somewhere I didn't know about. Maybe it was guilt about something I wasn't aware of. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But the receipts were real. 2 years of payments, consistent, never missed, and the handwriting was real. And those 4 words were real. I cried that night, not the scared crying from the night of the diagnosis, not the private falling apart and then making dinner kind. This was something else, slower, like a long exhale after years of holding your breath. The kind of crying that doesn't feel entirely like sadness, it has something else in it, something that might almost be gratitude if you could see around the confusion long enough to get there. Because here's the thing I kept bumping into, the thing I could not get around no matter how I approached it. The man had failed me in class. He had been cold, dismissive, unfair in ways I still believe were real and not imagined. And at the same exact time, he had been standing quietly in the background of the worst period of my life, spending his own money, a teacher's money, not a rich man's money, not Patricia's Wexford Road money, to keep my mother alive. How do you hold both of those things? How do you carry a grievance and a debt in the same two hands and still walk straight? I didn't have an answer that night. I'm not sure I have a clean one even now. I found out later from Renata that Mr. Holt had come to the hospital once in person, not to see my mother, she didn't know him. He had gone to the billing office and made an arrangement. He had apparently told them simply that he was a community member who had a connection to the family and wanted to help. He'd asked them not to publicize it. He had brought a cashier's check for the first 4 months and set up a recurring payment after that. A teacher, 43 years old, I later found out, divorced, renting an apartment on Sycamore Street, which I knew it was one of those solid, unspectacular streets of 2-bedroom apartments where respectable people lived quiet lives. He drove a 7-year-old Subaru. He ate lunch at his desk most days, Marcus once told me, because the cafeteria food gave him heartburn and he was too cheap to go out. Too cheap to go out for lunch, but not too anything to pay for a woman's cancer treatment. I went back through my memories of junior year like a detective going back through evidence with new eyes, looking for the thing I had missed, and I found pieces of it, small, quiet things I had dismissed as irrelevant or forgotten entirely. The one time he had kept me after class not to reprimand me but to ask in that clipped way he had whether everything was okay at home. I had said yes, fine, probably more sharply than I needed to. He'd nodded and let me go. I thought he was being nosy. Now I wondered what he'd seen in my face that I hadn't known was there. The time he had handed back one of my graded papers and there was something written on the last page below all the red corrections in smaller letters than the rest. I hadn't read it carefully because I was already braced for more criticism. I think it said something like, "You have a real voice. Don't let anyone, including me, tell you otherwise." I had thought it was a throwaway comment, the kind teachers write when they feel a little guilty about a grade. Now I wanted to go back and read it again. Now it felt like a message from a person who was more complicated than I had made them. Mr. Holt had a student I heard through someone who knew someone, a young woman in his sophomore class who had lost her father the previous year. He had quietly arranged through the school counselor for the family to receive a basket of groceries every month from an anonymous donor. When the family eventually found out it was him, he apparently shrugged and said he didn't want to make a thing of it. He was asked, according to this same chain of second-hand information, why he kept doing things like this, why he helped people quietly instead of loudly. He had reportedly said something like, "Because I'm not doing it so they can thank me." I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you about the moment I decided to confront him, because the word confront isn't even the right word and it took me a while to find the right one. What I wanted wasn't a confrontation. I didn't want to accuse him of anything. I wasn't angry. I was something more complicated than angry, something that didn't have a clean name. Grateful and unsettled and ashamed of myself in ways I was still identifying. I drove to the school on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. Almost 3 years had passed since graduation. The parking lot looked exactly the same potholes by the north entrance, same chain of orange cones marking the S. Pot near the gym where they were always going to repave soon. I sat in my car for a few minutes looking at the building like it might tell me something if I gave it enough time. Then I went inside. His classroom was room 114, same as it always had been. The door was open. He was at his desk reading something, making notes in the margin the way people do when they actually care what the book says back to them. He hadn't changed much. Same rotation of shirts. Same beard that couldn't decide what it was doing. The world's okayest teacher mug was still there on the corner of his desk. He looked up when I walked in. I saw the flicker of recognition. He set his pen down. "Sit down," he said, not warmly, not coldly. In his way, as if sitting down were the obvious and correct next thing to do, and he was simply pointing it out. I said. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I had rehearsed something in the car, some organized version of what I wanted to say. But sitting across that desk from him, with the afternoon light coming through the half-open blinds and the smell of chalk and old paper and whatever coffee he drank filling the room, the rehearsed version left me entirely. "I found out," I said, which was not what I had planned to say, but it was the truest sentence I had. He nodded once like he had been waiting for this. "How's your mother?" he said. And that was the thing that finally got me. Not the question itself, but the fact that it was his first response. Not a defense, not an explanation, not the careful self-protection of someone who had been caught at something. Just, "How's your mother?" "She's better," I said. "She finished treatment 6 months ago. The last scan came back clear." He nodded again. Something in his face changed, not dramatically, not the way it would change in a movie, where someone cries or smiles wide and the music tells you how to feel. Just a small shift, like a door opening a crack and then being closed again before you could see inside. "Good," he said. I asked him why. I think it came out smaller than I intended, a quiet word, not a demand. He looked at me for a moment, then looked out the window. "I grew up in a neighborhood like yours," he said. "My mother was sick when I was your age. We lost her." He paused. "I know what that waiting feels like. I know what it costs." He didn't say anything else for a while. Neither did I. "And the grades," I said eventually, because I needed to ask it, because I couldn't carry everything I'd felt in that class and leave it sitting in the room with us unspoken. "The D's, the red pen, you treated me like I was less than." He looked back at me, and this time he didn't look away. "You were angry all the time," he said, "underneath, and you were coasting on it, writing the minimum, pulling it out the night before, spending your real energy surviving instead of growing, which I understood better than you knew. But I didn't think softening the grade would help you. I thought it would confirm that you didn't have to push harder." He paused again. "I was probably wrong about the method. I wasn't wrong about what I saw in you." I sat with that, rolling it around, testing it against everything I'd felt back then, against every burning moment of unfairness and cold dismissal. "You could have just told me," I said. "Yes," he said, "I could have. No justification conversation, just agreement. There's a kind of honesty that sounds like defeat but isn't. It's just someone who's done enough living to stop defending the indefensible. That's what that sounded like. We talked for almost 2 hours that afternoon. About my mother, about his, about the neighborhood and what it does to a person, the pride and the weight and the specific loneliness of being young and poor and smart in a place that doesn't always know what to do with smart. He made bad coffee on a little machine by the window and handed me a cup without asking if I wanted one, which I did. And we talked the way people talk when they've dropped the performance and just have the conversation. I need to tell you something about what I felt walking out of that school 2 hours later, because I want to get this right. I didn't leave feeling like everything was resolved, like the narrative had tied itself into a bow. I left feeling something messier and more honest than that. I left feeling like I had been looking at a man through a keyhole and thinking I had seen the whole room. And then he had opened the door and I had to reckon with how much of the room I had missed. He was not a perfect teacher. He was not a kind man in the easy, available way that some people are kind. He had real flaws, a coldness in the classroom, a withholding of warmth that hurt me and probably hurt others. Those things were real. I don't want to undo them or explain them away. But he had also driven to a hospital billing office on a Tuesday, asked for the account of a woman he'd never met and written a check, and then come back and done it again and again for 2 years. I've thought a lot about why someone would do both of those things, be cold in one room and quietly generous in another. And the conclusion I keep coming back to is that people are rarely all one thing, that the capacity for real substantial goodness and the capacity for real substantial failure can live in the same person at the same time, that we are not our best moments and we are not our worst ones. We are all of it, moving through time, trying to figure out how to be. That's not a comfortable conclusion, but it's an honest one. Mom found out eventually. I told her one Sunday morning while the biscuits were in the oven and the coffee was on and the kitchen smelled like everything good about being alive and small in the best way. I sat across from her at the table and I told her the whole story. She listened without interrupting. She had always been that kind of listener, full attention, nothing held back. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to write him a letter." "You don't have to," I said. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." She wrote it that afternoon, sitting at the same kitchen table with a notepad she'd had for years, the one with the little blue flowers on the cover that she used for grocery lists and phone numbers, and apparently letters to men who had kept her alive without ever asking for anything back. I don't know exactly what she wrote. She didn't show me and I didn't ask. That letter was hers. She mailed it on a Monday. 2 weeks later, a small card arrived in our mailbox. On the front was a picture of a winter tree, bare branches, snow on the ground, one small red cardinal on the highest branch. Inside, in that careful handwriting, just one line. "It was the least I could do." Mom put it on the refrigerator, held up with a magnet shaped like a pineapple that we'd had since a trip to Florida when I was 9. It's still there. I've seen it every time I visit, which is every Sunday when I don't have a reason not to be there. Every Sunday when the biscuits are baking and the kitchen smells right and the world is small and manageable and mine. There was someone else in this story I haven't talked about yet. Her name was Donna Hargrove, and she was the richest woman whose child attended our high school. Everyone knew this because her son Brandon drove a car to school that none of the teachers could afford, and because Donna herself appeared at school fundraisers in outfits that cost more than my mother made in a month. She sat on the school board. She chaired the parent committee. She had opinions about the curriculum, and she shared them in that particular way wealthy people sometimes have, not loudly, but insistently, like someone who has learned that persistence is the privilege money buys you when you can't quite get away with demanding. She had gone to the principal's office twice about Mr. Holt. I found out through Marcus, who found out through Brandon, who probably shouldn't have shared it. She had complained that Mr. Holt's grading was inconsistent, that her son deserved better marks, that perhaps a different teaching approach would serve the students from the school's more involved families. I don't know what word she used for involved. I can guess what she meant by it. Mr. Holt had not changed his grades. The principal, to his credit, had backed him up. Brandon had gotten a C+ in English that year, the same grade the work earned him, and Donna Hargrove had apparently redirected her energies toward the new gymnasium fundraising campaign, where her money would be appreciated more directly. I tell you this not to make Donna Hargrove the villain of the story. She loved her son the way she knew how to love him, and that's not nothing. But there is something I keep coming back to when I hold her in the story next to Gerald Holt. She had more money than she would ever spend. She gave it to buildings and campaigns and things with her name attached. He had barely enough to get through the month some months, and he gave it to a stranger, quietly, so quietly he didn't even want the stranger to know. I wonder sometimes what we think generosity is for. My father came back into the picture a little eventually, not dramatically, not with apologies and tears and a movie-style reconciliation. He called on my 22nd birthday, which was the first time he'd called in almost a year, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing important and a few things that were. He asked about Mom. I told him she was in remission. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "I'm glad. I know I haven't been, I know things have been," and then he stopped and started again and eventually landed on, "I should have been more present." Yes, I said, not meanly, just as a fact the way Mom said important things, because it was true and preet. Ending it wouldn't help either of us. "I know," he said. And that was that, really. We didn't fix everything. We didn't rebuild the father-son relationship from some movie template, but we started talking more regularly, a phone call here and there, and there is something in that, something small and slow and real that I've chosen to count as something, because the alternative is carrying it forever, and I'm not doing that anymore. I've put down enough heavy things. Marcus, my friend Marcus, who got that B+ on the essay, started community college the year after me. He asked me once, over burgers at a diner we'd been going to since we were 15, whether I resented Mr. Holt. Whether, after everything, knowing what I knew, I still felt cheated by that class. I thought about it, really thought, not just the reflexive answer. "I think he was wrong to handle it the way he did in the classroom," I said. "I think a kid who's already carrying what I was carrying didn't need more harshness. I think there were better ways." "But," Marcus said, because he knew me. "But I'm not sure I would have pushed myself the way I eventually did if I hadn't spent that whole year feeling like I had something to prove, even if the thing I was proving it against was unfair." I picked up a French fry. "I don't know how to unknot not that. Whether the hard thing helped me or just hurt me in a way I survived, I'm not sure you can always tell the difference. Marcus thought about that. Heavy, he said finally. Yeah, I said heavy. We finished our burgers and talked about other things and left a good tip because we both remembered being the kind of people who noticed when you didn't. I'm in my late 20s now. I work at a nonprofit that helps families navigate medical billing. It turns out that spending years watching your mother drown in paperwork teaches you things about that system that you can eventually turn into something useful. I went back to school at 24, graduated at 27 in a room a lot smaller than the high school gym with a lot fewer people watching, and my mother in the third row wearing a yellow dress she'd bought specifically for the day. I still visit Mr. Holt sometimes. Not often, he's not a man who wants much company, I've come to understand, and I respect that about him. But occasionally, a cup of coffee in the classroom at the end of the school day while the afternoon light comes through those half-open blinds and the world is quiet for a few minutes. He asks about my work, I ask about his students. He tells me about the ones he worries about in his oblique way, a kid who's clearly smart and clearly somewhere else in his head, and I know what he means when he says it. I've been that kid. In his classroom, actually. I don't know if he has ever fully made peace with how he taught me. I suspect he probably has a version of it in his head that he's comfortable with, the same way we all make the story of our choices into something livable. I'm not interested in dismantling that. That's his work, not mine. What I know is this: he saw something in me, some difficulty, some capacity, maybe some echo of himself, and he chose to do two things about it. One of them was wrong. One of them was the most quietly extraordinary act of human generosity I've ever witnessed up close. And he did both of them from the same place, I think. From a belief that struggling people deserve to keep struggling because struggling is how you become something. And from a knowledge, older and quieter than anything he could teach in a classroom, that sometimes the only way to let someone struggle with dignity is to hold the floor up beneath them while they do it. He held the floor up for my mother while she fought for her life. He never asked to be thanked. He never even wanted to be known. I know now, and I think about it more than he'll ever realize. Mom's biscuits are still the best I've ever had. She taught me the recipe last Thanksgiving, the real one, the one by feel, the one her mother taught her. I made them while she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and her slight smile, correcting my technique with small pointed comments that sounded exactly like a teacher who wasn't going to soften the critique because softening it wouldn't help me. I told her that and she laughed, the full kind, the kind that takes up the whole room. I learned that from somewhere, she said. Maybe we all do. Maybe the people who shape us don't always shape us the way they intended. Maybe the sharp corners of someone's personality leave marks that eventually become the places where we grew stronger, not despite the sharpness but around it, the way a tree grows around a fence that was once in its way. I don't want to make a lesson out of Gerald Holt's life. That feels like doing something to him he wouldn't ask for and wouldn't want, but I'll tell you what I carry from it. I carry the understanding, that people are doing things you cannot see, that the version of a person you construct from the limited information you have is never the whole person. That bitterness is comfortable and it costs you things you don't realize you're spending. That generosity doesn't always announce itself. That some of the most important things anyone ever did for you, you won't know about until years later, and some you'll never know about at all. And I carry Tuesday, that particular Tuesday, standing in that hospital room with a receipt in my hand and a sleeping mother beside me and a world that had just revealed itself to be more complicated and more kind than I had given it credit for being. The machine breathed its steady rhythm. Her chest rose and fell. Outside, the city went on being the city, and I stood there in the middle of it all, holding a piece of paper that turned everything I thought I knew upside down, and I let myself be changed by it. That's all any of us can do, really. Let the true things change us, even when the true things are hard to hold, even when they don't come neatly tied, even when they arrive on a Tuesday in a hospital room, in handwriting you recognize from every paper that ever told you that you weren't quite enough. It turns out that same hand was writing something else the whole time, something you didn't know to look for, something that was keeping the people you love alive while you were too busy being hurt to notice. Pay attention, not just to what people say to you, to what they do when they think no one is watching. That's where the truth lives.